So, special welcome to the family of Bjørnar. We are glad to be hosting this seminar with Bjørnar Haveland on the tiny Shatila refugee camp. As a little quiz for you, you can try to see if you can make out the camp somewhere. Anyone's guess where it might be. Maybe when we finish the presentation, you will know where it is. Huh? But it's it's a difficult. Is it here? Is it there? When Bjørnar finish, we will know. So, Bjørnar's work sort of speaks to two projects that we are doing. One on urban refugees, where we try to understand the life situation for urban refugees and how we might improve it. And we are looking at a number of cities in the Middle East to see how how refugees are doing in these cities, for better or worse. In the second project, we are borrowing on the kind of camp concept in a project called Super Camp, where we are trying to understand how the Middle East, over a long period of time, has emerged as a kind of a huge camp where refugees are contained and unable to leave. And as you know, refugees are also being forced to come back to the Middle East. So both these projects, both the Urban Refugees Project and the Super Camp, speaks in a way to the work of Bjørnar, and his work speaks to us. This is like, camps at different, levels, micro, macro. So the way we'll do it is that Bjørnar, he will speak for about 30 minutes, presenting Shatila. And then we'll do something that we haven't done before. We will use the fantastic exhibition that is now on the other side of this glass wall. And we will, after he finishes, we will walk quickly, grab a coffee if necessary, and we'll sort of congregate inside the camp as it is, inside this Shatila exhibition. And there we will do a conversation with Bjørnar. This will be led by Kjersti Berg, colleague, friend, scholar. She is also, in her own right, a scholar on UNRWA camps, historian on the UNRWA and the Palestinian refugee camps. And we have also other staff members here who would like to chip in. So I think that's all. We start with Bjørnar. To introduce him, Bjørnar has been on and off. We have been met now over 3 years since he first showed up here at CMI. Been a relationship I really appreciated. Bjørnar is educated in Michigan, US, for a bachelor. He has his master degree from BAS in Bergen. And what he's presenting for us here now is based on his diploma, his master dissertation. So I think that's all. Floor is yours, Bjørnar. Great to have you here. And thanks to all for coming.
Thank you for a nice introduction, Are. It's really nice to be here at CMI, and I'm quite excited about being able to show this work in a place where people are working with these same kind of issues. And so what I'm going to present now is more a kind of process that leads to this exhibition and proposal that's here in the back. So we will keep it quite informal, so if you have questions, you can just shout them out as we go if you want to. So the project now is a fellowship project from the University of Michigan that turned into a master project here at the architecture school in Bergen. So we're mostly going to talk about Shatila camp in Beirut, but to see kind of what leads to this project that is not really completely architecture, not really completely anthropology, and where I don't know exactly where it fits in between. I think it's quite useful to look at a Sahrawi camp in Algeria, where I went for a kind of posting with the Peace Corps before I started university. And it's a situation that's quite similar to the Palestinian situation, where you have a large population from Western Sahara being exiled in camps in Algeria. And also similar in the sense that in the camps there is a complete autonomy. The Sahrawi kind of state in exile maintains also its own army, its own political system, etc. And it's a place that really looks like a camp. right? In the kind of traditional image of what we imagine often a camp to look like. And it's been also a very old refugee camp. It's been there since 1975 and has kind of built a whole society around the idea, really, of being refugees. And what I noticed when I was living there is that despite having been there for such a long time, that you start to build certain amounts of infrastructure and houses using Adobe, many things in the built environment are still kind of maintained, symbolizes this impermanence of this place, even though there's no kind of perspective of this community leaving. So even though people are starting to build buildings, the tent is always maintained in the compounds of where people live, for example, as the most central gathering point. So even though people build many different houses, they always maintain this kind of tent in the middle as a kind of living room, and in many ways in how they decorate, how they build, how they even plan the camp. This notion that it is a camp and not permanent is very important. So then when I studied architecture at the University of Michigan and made a fellowship proposal wanting to look into how people express identity through the way they build in these refugee camps that are really, really old, right? So because it's a place that's temporary, yet for 3, 4, 5 generations, it's really difficult to call that temporary anyway. And so, and I got that fellowship, and the first place I traveled to on this fellowship, it was a fellowship of experimental learning. So I got a pat on the back and told to go sightseeing refugee camps for a year. I went to Shatila, and the background of this project was me thinking as an architect, how can you then construct and plan refugee camps that are safe, with good infrastructure, that are healthy and good to live in, but that at the same time don't symbolize this kind of incarceration or imprisonment that a camp can be. And so then I come to Shatila, that's in the middle of Beirut. And it's quite a different camp. Super small, very dense. It was built on the outskirts of Beirut in 1949. But in the 70 years of kind of turbulent history that has passed, it's now kind of in the very geographical center of the city. And it was quite right, and I kind of reacted to, after living there for a bit, what I felt was like a misrepresentation. So this camp, because it's so central in Beirut, and Beirut is kind of the capital of aid, diplomacy, and journalism from all of Europe and the West covering the Middle East, this becomes a kind of poster child of refugee crisis. It's 10 minutes away from the hotels, so it becomes this backdrop for reproducing a refugee story again and again and again, where the place itself falls in the background or is kind of just conveniently used as a kind of dramatic backdrop. So, and even kind of research trying to take the placemaking seriously, so the placemaking that happens when you live for a long time in a place with anyone, kind of failed to really look at the product that this camp is, right? The built environment is a product of people living and building. So, and also kind of the image that people forge of themselves living there through social media is not the same as what newspapers wants to frame people as. So also, it is a camp that's like because it's in the middle of Beirut. Like it has a strong magnitude, and it was hard for me to imagine that this is a kind of place that has no agency, like not just being very centrally located, but it's also between all the kind of sectarian dividing lines in Beirut: the Christian on the left, the Sunni on the left, and the Shia in the south, and the divide between kind of the rich and the poor Beirut, north-south, as well as kind of being the central point focusing all the informal hubs of public transport in Beirut. So like there is a certain, it's not a place that has no agency. And so what happened when I was there, I was initially planned to travel to different places and kind of compare how identity was being expressed. But I came there in 2015 in the middle of kind of when Russia just had gotten into Syria and the biggest wave of refugees came. And while people were writing about this refugee crisis in Norwegian newspapers, of how people were flooding into Europe and so on, and what people did not realize is that it takes people often a lot more time to move around close to where they're from than go to Europe. And Shatila, because it's so centrally located and because it is autonomous, it's a very convenient place for many Syrian refugees to hide in. It also has kind of the biggest market in Lebanon. And this is how it looks like, right? Quite different from this first image of a camp that we saw. Right, super dense, but also with like lots of shops, economic activity going on. Like it's a really like a vibrant place with many, many different realities in the same place. So how do you approach working with this place as an architect? And how do you also take it seriously, the place itself? So how I approached this was trying to approach it like it would be any other place I would map and draw architecturally, which kind of meant making new maps that didn't kind of exist before or are difficult to access, mapping historical events and how they have shaped the built environment, looking at this Sabra Shatila massacre that happened during the civil war in Lebanon shaped the kind of naming misunderstanding. So this whole Shatila and the slum that is around, or informal neighborhoods that are around it, is always referred to as Sabra and Shatila, and it's really ambiguous what is what, where the boundaries are, and so on, even though this area really contains lots of very different communities. And I think the massacre, Sabra Shatila massacre, has been one of the things that has led to this kind of confusion, putting this area into one box when in reality it is many different places, and always described as a kind of very chaotic and place where it's very difficult to see what is a camp, what is not a camp, etc. But then, for example, here I started mapping the building heights in the area, and you can kind of see the camp very clearly popping out. So like the border of what is the camp and what is the neighborhoods around it is quite visible when you look at zoning, or when you look at different religious groups and where they live, but also when you look at kind of the symbology that is being used in the different neighborhoods. And these kind of sectarian divisions are also reflected in the way people that live there view space. So this is a cognitive map drawn kind of from memory, where from a guy living just next to the football field, and you can see that there are some places that are just 30 meters away from his house that he doesn't even inscribe on the map at all. I also tried to, it's a very contested space, and I sort of tried to map or illustrate the nature of how politically contested it is by trying to map many of the different political actors that try to, in many ways, exert influence. And then also by drawing the architecture that is there. And this drawing that is also in the exhibition over there is it's a section drawing that cuts through the entire camp. That also has drawings of how the houses look like on the inside, and I view it as a kind of visual study where, from a sample of around 30 or 40 different apartments that I visited, I kind of tried to, ranging from the very poorest of the people living in Shatila to the richest, try to make a kind of sample of how it looks like and fill in the blanks to show how the relationships between inside and outside and the private versus the public and different spheres. Also looking at how do people build, what are kind of the systems behind why it looks the way it looks like, turning it from being chaotic to being quite organized and logical. Right? And what happens in Shatila, like a few other camps, is that Palestinians are moving out, constructing new apartments, renting out to among Syrian refugees, so that even though visually and in name this is a Palestinian camp, it's now more than 70% Syrian. And so kind of renting out to other types of refugees is a way a very marginalized Palestinian community is kind of making a living. Right, and also going back to this idea of how people express identity, where are the different, how is identity expressed in different spaces, and looking for patterns in this. Both where is there political imagery, where do people decorate, and there are some, I think, interesting patterns in that. Okay. But then there's so I really gave up on this idea of constructing a good refugee camp. And we can maybe talk about that later. But I was quite concerned with how do I, as a kind of foreigner, as a visitor that just comes here, what is really my right to come and kind of propose anything in this space? Because as an architect, what you do are expected to do for an exam, and what you're trained to do is always to kind of more make proposals more than do methodological research. And I really didn't want to make anything, and not make like bench or kindergarten or these kind of interventions that would be typical of this kind of master project. And which is also why maybe I ended up doing so much mapping, because I was resisting doing anything at all. But then there are a lot of stories. But then there's this water tower, inside Shatila that is quite symbolic of how outside actors and NGOs and the UN, etc., treats these kinds of spaces. It's a water tower supposed to provide fresh water to this camp that, despite being in the middle of the city, is not connected to any of the, not even the electricity grid or the water grid of the city. But this contains kind of reverse osmosis, pumps, lots of complicated systems to provide salty groundwater into drinkable water to the entire camp. And of course it's built, but it's not in use, because there was a failure to account for the political situation in the camp and how to organize running kind of the day-to-day operations of this project. So I kind of made this kind of provocative image of a hotel inside Shatila, reacting to myself being a kind of tourist there, but also the amount of research and the amount of journalists, and also just people I would meet in Beirut asking if I could do tours for them. Like, there is a kind of definitely a market for a hotel inside the camp. And the idea was, well, this kind of introverted luxury hotel for UN employees would need water, and so it would run the water tower and help provide fresh water to the entire camp. And this is what I started working with as a kind of master project proposal. But then there is something about making this one-liner, this kind of provocative statement that is maybe interesting, but then maybe the architecture, the way you shape it, wouldn't really matter very much, because it would be a kind of completely unrealistic project just designed in order to provoke. So, but at the same time, I thought there is enough truth in this project to try to scale it down and see, well, if this would be an aid project, how would you make it as realistic as possible, and how would that project try to accommodate as many needs as possible? And by treating it realistically, you have to deal with all the different economical, political, social challenges that exist, and through that object that architecture is, be able to tell a lot more stories and show how they're intertwined in ways that maybe are difficult if you look at just different fields. So yeah, here's an illustration of the hotel inside the camp, providing fresh water, helping the camp become green. This is the tower the way it is today, with the only 2 buildings in the camp that are actually made by UNRWA or the United Nations. And I kind of proposed this hotel then in the middle that would contain, so then it would be a hotel, right, that would use as a way of how, right, so the argument of the hotel is that, well, the demand is there, so it's a way of refining the product of already renting out to other refugees. You can rent it out to visiting foreigners instead and earn even more money. Right, so it's a logic that's already there. And it's a place that would then buy services from the camp, it would collaborate more, and such a big building would also be able to provide, you could build in services that are not in place already, as well. So this camp, it has, the water tower in the middle, and all the infrastructure, but then it lifts up, kind of making a big space on the ground level, because ground level space is like a super valuable commodity in this camp, and it's very difficult to take things away, but always easier to add. And so by kind of lifting it up, you can create this kind of public space on the ground level, making spaces to play, etc. And then also providing some other kind of qualitative services as well. Being a water tower, one of the natural things to put, I think, is a pool. And it comes back to this idea, the social media images I showed earlier, that, when Norwegians say they are really tired and they need to take care of themselves and give themselves value, they go to a spa or go swimming or something like that, right? But like to say that a refugee in Shatila you would draw in a pool instead of a school or a healthcare center seems for some reason very absurd to many people. But I think when you live in a place that, are we good on time? When you live in a place that in a way is designed to force you to project your dreams to other places, maybe that makes sense. So here is this kind of selfie pool on top that's kind of made to give real quality of life, or like provide a kind of quality that is a luxury. And I think luxury sometimes is quite important to people. In the architecture school, people would be like, "Ooh, a luxury hotel! Like, we don't do luxury things. We're a bit too cool for that." But like, things that are cliché because there is a kind of big popular demand for it. And if you live in a place where the only way you can access that is through social media, that is the image that also you want. And so, kind of. Having this kind of standard luxury or cliché luxury, you say, I think could be really valuable. And so this is a section drawing of the hotel. It has rooms around the big atrium in the middle, and gyms and series of pools at the top. So, I mean, that is more or less the presentation I prepared. Maybe I went a bit too fast, or I don't know how we're on time. Yeah, okay, but then it's perfect. So yeah, we can grab a coffee and then we can talk in the exhibition maybe.
We'll do the Q&A and the conversation now. So just walk out and then find the coffee. You can take a chair and sit. And
det går an å ta med stol.
And then we do a very informal talk. Thank you.
Ja. Vi skal bare stille spørsmål og sånn i utstillingen.
Spørsmålet vi skal inn der.
Jeg bare gikk veldig kjapt.
Bjørnar, det var veldig fint.
Okay. Ja, men bra.
Det var veldig forståelig og veldig fint og
Okay.
veldig rolig.
Ja, men så bra.
Og superinteressant.
Ja.
Vi er nødt til å bare en generaltør. Vi er nødt til å ta en gang til.
Ja, ok. Det var greit.